In this lesson, we'll explore how we can animate using frame animation in the timeline panel. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so up until this point, we've been using the video timeline panel in all of the previous lessons. We're going to go ahead and shift gears and switch to the frame-based timeline panel. So to switch from the video timeline panel to the frame-based timeline panel, we can come down here to the bottom screen left of the panel, and you'll see this button that looks like three little lined up squares. So we can go ahead and click on that, and now we can see that our timeline panel has completely changed. So if you're also starting a new document, like if we came up here to File, went to New, and you already had your timeline open, by default it's going to be set to Create Video Timeline. However, if you want to go straight into frame-based timeline, you can go to that little arrow right there and you can switch it to Create Frame Animation. Okay. So what we're going to be doing is basically animating this little guy here, this character, animating some phonemes, or basically animating some different mouth expressions. Now if you want to know more about phonemes, I have an entire course where we go through and create all of these different mouth expressions. All right. And so these different mouth expressions, or phonemes, can basically be used to sound out all different kinds of words. And so you could basically take this approach and lip sync a character like this to some spoken audio. All right. So I don't recommend using the frame-based timeline panel for video at all. I would stick to the video timeline panel. But for something like this, you could very easily do lip sync audio. You go just going frame by frame. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about how these frames work. So each frame is basically going to record whatever is visible over here in the layers panel. So when I say visible, whatever we have a little eye turned on next to. So if we turn off the visibility of that layer just by checking on that eye, we can see that reflected in our initial frame there. Okay, and even if we checked off the background, again we can see that reflected. So it captures whatever we have visible. So we're going to make sure that we only turn on the visibility of the different phonemes that we want to basically sound out the word hello. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start with just the rest pose, kind of the huh or the H sound in hello. To make a new layer, we'll come right here and click on this button. And again, it's recording what's visible. So this time I want to go ahead and choose a different phoneme. We're going to go with E. And then we'll go ahead and just continue making additional layers, adding kind of the smaller E there. We'll make another layer to drop in the L. And then if we don't want that L, we can go ahead and try that one. And then we'll switch that one. So kind of having two different L's there to kind of make a nice smoother transition of the tongue movement there. Okay. We'll make a couple more layers and basically work in the O, kind of the big O, and then kind of the smaller O. All right. And then we'll do kind of a rest pose. Or not a rest pose, but rather kind of a neutral pose where his mouth is basically closed. Okay, so each one of these frames are basically being held for 5 seconds. And we know this because it says 5 seconds beneath each frame. So 5 seconds is a really long time. In fact, if we tried to hit play, we can see how long it holds on each frame. And so that's a really long time, definitely not fluid animation. So let's go ahead and click stop. And so what we want to do is change the duration of how long each frame is held by clicking this little disclosure arrow right here. And it's probably off screen. However, you're going to be given a drop down menu, and it'll start with no delay, 0.1 seconds, 0.2, 0.5, and then 1, 2, 5, 10 seconds. And then there's other if you want to get very specific, okay? So what I'm going to do is set this to 0.1. And in fact, if we wanted to set all of these to 0.1, I could basically click on this first one, then hold Shift, click on the last frame, then click on any one of these disclosure arrows, and set them all to 0.1 seconds. So now if we played our animation again, it feels a lot more fluid. And at this point, we can really start to adjust the overall timing and speed of different frames to really fine tune it. So we may want to come over here to say frame 5. We'll set that to no delay, so it's just 0 seconds. And we may even want to do that to the very last frame. And then we can kind of play it again, and it just feels a lot more fluid. Now you can do a thing called tweening. However, I don't recommend it with something like this where it's a stationary object. And so what tweening does is it basically fills in information. So if we came over here to say our third frame, and we wanted to make a tween, basically add in additional frames to make a transition, we could then click on this little button right here, and you'll notice how it looks like a series of circles kind of fading out. It's probably more suited for something like a bouncing ball, which is probably why that button looks like that. So we'll click on that, and it gives you the option for how many frames you want to have added in. So we'll just go ahead and go with the 5 that it's offering there. And we can see all of those tweened frames. Here's the problem though. They're all kind of faded out, and the transition just doesn't look very nice. In fact, if we hit play, we kind of see that weird flickering. And so it's just not very appealing at all. So if we want to delete these frames, I can just click on that first one and then that last tween frame, holding down shift, and then we can click on this little trash can button, and it'll ask us, of course, if we want to delete the frames. Yes, and they're gone. So you may want to use tweening for something more like if you had one object like a ball moving to another area of your canvas. It's better. Tweening is really more appropriate for moving objects, whereas in this case our character is very stationary, and even though his mouth is technically moving, it just doesn't work very well. So again, I would really recommend frame-by-frame animation for something kind of like this, or if you're using just some different still images, whether they're photographs or just something that you've put together using different layers. Feel free to try this out. It's pretty simple, and you might get the look that you're aiming for visually. But if you're going to be using video, you may want to jump back to the video timeline. And so we can easily get back to it just by clicking on this button right here, and that takes us back into our video timeline. So pretty cool stuff. We have some nice variety there, some different avenues to take in the timeline itself, and we've kind of started to see that over the past several lessons. So in the next lesson, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about rendering. I know that in a couple of lessons already I've shown just kind of the final rendered video, just so we could see it playing a little bit more fluidly rather than just watching a preview. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next lesson. So we'll see you then.